Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trilokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata Chapita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vedyadraminam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we are in chapter 9, and I think starting on verse 29. And Shweta has been so kind as to read the shlokas for us.
May I begin?
Can you speak a little louder, dear?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Samoham sarvabhuteshu na me dveshyosti na priyaha ye bhajanti tumam bhaktyam. One moment. Sorry, Jim, the Kindle died. Just give me a moment.
I can barely hear your voice. Can you get closer to your microphone?
She said that her Kindle died.
Your Kindle died?
Yeah, she said.
Yes, but I have a book as well with me, so let me just find the shlok in that.
That's much better volume too.
Okay, good. So just give me a moment. Sorry about that.
Quite all right. I forget to plug phone and iPad in sometimes.
Yeah, I found it in the book. Can you hear me?
Yes, good volume.
Samoham sarvabhuteshu na me dveshyosti na priyaha ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya mayi te teshu chapyaham. I am the same to all beings. To me there is none hateful or dear, but those who worship me with devotion are in me, and I too am in them.
So we have two levels of ways in which to look at this verse. How does God see us? God has no taste. God loves people you and I might have nothing to do with. Meaning, consciousness shines. All feelings of dear, not dear, this one's special, this one's not special, are all attributes of the mind. But consciousness itself, like the sun, shines on all with equality. Now, another way to interpret this verse, which I think is of great value, is to see Krishna not just speaking as the self, but as the man, or we could say the man or woman of wisdom, who as a person looks on all with an equal mind. I can remember a camp where Swamiji said, "My love is like a fire hose. Whoever gets in front of me gets blasted." And one of my favorite stories, I can remember going to a camp and there was a fellow who was there who frankly drank too much. You could smell it on his breath. And he had some mental problems. I suspect he may have heard voices or something, or had a very loud inner dialogue, because he would wear headphones all the time with budgeons, and then he would sing out of tune, and it was very obnoxious to the other delegates. And other delegates at the camp would avoid him. They roll their eyes. What's this fellow doing here? But then he goes and has a private session with Swamiji. And then he comes out and his eyes are as big as saucers. And he says, "Swamiji gave me his watch, and it was a Rolex." So it was a teaching, not only for this young man, but for all the rest of us. So what's the teaching? Our job is to endeavor to love as God loves. Endeavor to love the world the way the avatar loves, the way the woman or man of wisdom loves. Now, it's spontaneous for the realized being. You and me, our job is to practice it. So, what happens? You and I will be in a group of people, maybe at work or socially, and there'll be someone who annoys us. And I think we've all had this experience. You say, "Oh, so and so, that person just annoys me. Don't you find that person annoying?" And another friend or a spouse will say, "Well, they're quirky, but no, they don't particularly annoy me." And we get all kind of upset because they're not annoyed the way we're annoyed. But what it shows us is, I'm the one with the klesha. So the ego endeavors to avoid, defend, fight, argue with people we don't like. The yogi is invited to, as it were, lean into it a little bit, to notice, oh, this person annoys me. Maybe it's even stronger. This person really disturbs me. And the yoga is stay present, lean into it a little bit. See if I can figure out what it is in me that's getting triggered. Does that mean I have to put up with people who treat me badly? That's a different issue. It doesn't mean we don't speak truth to power. But if I'm disturbed, no matter the cause, I'm the one with the klesha. I was talking on the phone with a sometime student who was having difficulty with a supervisor. She was unjust and she was projecting onto me and she was treating me badly and she wasn't respecting my boundaries and she. And all of that may be true, but this young man was quite upset by it. So whether or not the projections of others are true or not true, our job is to see all with this samadrishta, this equality of vision. As we practice this, the world starts to treat us differently. Of course, we all hear of stories of Ramana Maharshi, where the very wild animals would come to be in his presence. On a much more contemporary and smaller level, I was talking with a particular student who always gets into arguments with people. He's always getting into conflict on the bus or on the BART or at the supermarket. You know, his mind is telling him that people out there are all jerks. And I say, well, I don't know what universe you live in, but I get on the bus and a little old lady sits down next to me and we start talking about God. Happens all the time. What's different? Now, even though consciousness is the self in everyone, the presence of God as Ishvara, the Lord, is there for everyone. What's the difference between the yogi and the person who's driven by ego? The person who's driven by ego perceives a chaotic universe, and that impels us into a need to control. But the yogi practices what Patanjali in Yoga Sutra calls Ishvara Pranidhana, trustful surrender to God. Constant effort to soften the heart, to surrender to the situation, to practice accepting life on life's terms. Then, using skillful means, act as you will. As you will. We're no longer fighting anyone or anything. And even if it's given you to stand for justice, we do so with a loving and cool. It's a very, very important practice. And to the degree that we turn within, and this Atmaramana, this reveling in the self, this soaking the mind, becomes dear to us. Then that wonderful Brahmananda rasa, the bliss, the kiss of the bliss of Brahman, becomes available to us. Is that bliss of Brahman available to the miserable person? Yes, it is. But they don't know how to access it. That's all. So, in Viveka Chudamani, in the qualifications of a fit student, Shankara discusses Shama, that peaceful state of mind when it rests in steady contemplation of the goal after having muhur again and again detached itself from the chaos of the sense objects and the people. How steady observation of their defects. This doesn't mean this is a wrong person this way, this is a bad person there. It means seeing the defect of my attachment to one person, my aversion to another. It's the raga and the dvesha that pulls my mind out and keeps me from that shama, that peace state of mind, keeping the mind tuned down. Powerful, powerful shloka. Any questions about it? Any thoughts on the practice that's implied? All right, next verse.
अपि चेत सुदुराचारो भजते मामनन्यभाक् साधुरेव समन्तव्यः सम्यग् व्यवसितो हि सः. If even a very wicked person worships me with devotion to none else, he should be regarded as righteous, for he has rightly resolved.
So, one of St. Augustine's most famous sayings is every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. So this is what Krishna is talking about. Most of us enter the practice loaded with vulgarities, if we're honest. If we were to stop and inventory, do a searching and a fearless inventory of our defects of character, our doshas, our kleshas, where I'm selfish, where I'm self-seeking, where I'm full of fear, where I'm dishonest, not just cash register honesty, where I don't tell the truth to other people, where I fib, and even worse, where I lie to myself. Being honest with how much of my life is just driven by fear. I'm afraid of being the center of attention. I'm afraid of being ignored. I'm afraid of commitment, but I'm afraid of not having any intimacy. I'm afraid of success. I'm afraid of failure. All these double binds which tend to paralyze us. I just make a list of all the people in my life I've harmed. Oh my God. So we begin to see, well, Krishna is not talking about the fellow who's arrested and put in prison. He's talking about you and me. Self with a small s. Ahankriti. Its various manifestations. How I've acted from that. Now, we cannot change the past. But we can repair a good part of it. For example, if there's a former partner or business associate or colleague, it always just baffles me when people say, oh, I'm not speaking to so-and-so in my family. What's that going to do? I'm into punishing them. That's just nonsense for a yogi. So sometimes we can repair past relationships, but if the other person is not willing, there's not a whole lot we can do. We have to let it go. But we can lighten the burden of the past significantly by being willing to make amends. This is not just an apology. An amend should include an apology, but it's more than that. It's to behave differently. To make right things that we may have done. It's an amazing practice. All of our basic spiritual teachings in some way articulate, be here now, be in the present, live in the now. The one thing that pulls us out of the present most is regret for the past. Holding on to old hurts. That doesn't mean, for example, there may be great healing going through, say, early childhood trauma, or we might have been abused or abandoned emotionally, etc. It's of great value to look at some of that stuff. but we have to be willing to let it. And we start to live different. There's an old slogan at the level of the ego. Do you know how to build self-esteem? Do esteemable actions. Very simple. When you understand the law of karma, it makes perfect sense. Now, ultimately, we want to get beyond even good self-esteem. Be identified with the self. But it's amazing once we start on this path, wherever we are, whatever we've done. Are we going to fail sometimes and fall short and act out in ways that we regret? Of course. Do our best to clear up the wreckage of the present as well as the wreckage of the past and work some more. It's a practice. And here Krishna says, even if you've been the worst of rascals, if you commit yourself to this path, and here he expresses it, commit yourself to the love of the infinite. We are transformed. Another way to look at this verse. In the beginning, what we may need to do is practice thought replacement. If our mind is habituated towards negative thinking all the time, we may have to do the tapas to practice positive thinking. But the higher practice is to get out of the mind, to practice sakshiva, take on the attitude of the witness, just observe the thoughts and the feelings. I am not my thoughts, I am not my feelings. Ultimately, most powerful way to heal the mind is to get out of the mind in time starts to become the friend of the yogi. It's no longer our enemy. Any thoughts on this verse and on the practice? All right, next verse.
क्षिप्रं भवति धर्मात्मा शश्वच्छान्ति निगच्छति कौन्तेय प्रतिजानीहि न मे भक्तः प्रणश्यति. Soon he becomes righteous and attains eternal peace, O Kaunteya. Know for certain that my devotee is never destroyed.
Yes. So soon, usually quicker than we think. if we put the time and the practice in, our behavior changes, our thought life changes, our emotional reactions to the world change. Now, where we need to make a distinction is the difference between the lip Vedantin and the Jnana Yogi. What is a lip Vedanta? Sits there, maybe with a glass of sherry, fire in the fireplace, and reads scripture. Get some comfort from it. Good sit down. For modern days, goes onto YouTube, watches lots of videos. May go hear a lecture from this Swami and that Swami and this Swami. But themselves does not practice. The Jnana Yogi, on the other hand, sees that the scripture always implies practice. Now, by the time we've gotten to the 9th chapter, what should we be doing with our life? Well, we've worked a lot on karma yoga, acting in the world, renouncing the fruits of action, serve the society, practice discrimination between the self and the not self, endeavoring to see the self in and through all the phenomena of the world, endeavoring to tell the truth about when I'm reactive. As I like to say, just don't do something, stand there. Be present to what's going on. Constantly trying to introvert the attentive faculty. Koham, who am I? Then, when we're able to endeavor to tune the mind up, deep meditation, even when we're functioning in the abhyasa, vairagya, practice, tends renunciation. What is vairagya? That desire, meaning we don't achieve it overnight, to give up attachment, sangraha. All experiences gained through the senses, positive and negative. And that desire to give up our identification with any form of self, from the body to my family, to my career, to my possessions, what other people think of me, to what I know spiritually, all. No personal sense of self is real. That is why. Now, if we practice, soon the fruits of that practice start to manifest in our lives. And frequently, other people will notice it before we do. I have a particular student, and when he was in school, he was quite a party animal and quite a rascal. Now he's become a yogi, good practitioner. And he went back to India for an extended visit a year or so ago. And all his old friends are still basically doing what they were doing in school. They don't have families and stuff, but they're still very extroverted people. They were all expecting this fellow to, oh, let's go out and party. His mind was still, and he was detached and compassionate and quiet, but very different. Very, very different. What's got into you? You're so different. He may not have thought he'd changed so much, but his friends sure did. So it's not like we're going to struggle really hard at this and then I'm enlightened and I can go back to my life. No. We make yoga a way of life. I commit to being a yogi for the rest of my life. Why? Because it's the most intelligent way to live. It's not because of future fruits. Well, maybe that will happen. Hopefully it does. But it's the most practical and intelligent way to maximize the quality of life right here. Yeah. Any thoughts on this process? And there's a big dose of grace. As we practice this Ishvara Pranidhana, this surrender to God as we choose to approach God. It could be the Mother, could be Lord Shiva, could be Lord Krishna, could be Jesus, Allah. Doesn't matter. We are changed from the inside out. It's not so much about behavior modification. It's about invoking God's grace by turning to that. Beautiful, beautiful couple of verses. Any thoughts on it? Now, I do want to talk about something that happens as we enter into this way of life. And the technical term is kashaya. Kashaya is the vomiting up of the unconscious tendencies of the mind. The spiritual life is not so much the superimposition of some giant band-aid of peace upon my ulcerated vasanas. It's exactly the opposite. It's like lancing a boil and all the yucky stuff comes out. So we may go through periods where we feel out of control. We can be laughing and ecstatic 1 minute, and the next minute we're sobbing. Unbidden lust comes up out of nowhere. Or fear isn't attached to anything. Anger. Deep, gnarly barnacles in the mind. You're not going crazy if this is happening. Who's had some of this happen? It's part of the process. But I promise you, if you stay with it, do your best to not act out on it, out of kindness for the people around you. If you need to express it, you can do it with a dear friend, a journal. But it's just what we call the unloading of the unconscious. But it does start to settle down after a while. That doesn't mean after years of practice, some gnarly lump may come up and you get bushwhacked by a reaction. Oh my God, where in God's name did that come from? It's always wonderfully humiliating. But what is it that gets humiliated? Only my stupid ego anyway. But you'll find that overall, in time, soon even the rascal or even the person with deep trauma, a lot of brokenness or fear or heavy super ego. That's another thing that many of us are afflicted by. Super ego is that voice from parents or school or it's a society. You must do this, you cannot do that. All that has to go. And in time, the yogi starts to live by their intuition, a deeper part of the mind, where we're not approaching life from a recipe, trying to figure it out, trying to protect and control situations. We're able to have real spontaneity. I like to say the woman or man of wisdom is out of control. But there's a perfect appropriateness to situations because the yogi has given up an investment. I must have it this way, I'll never have it that way. Any thoughts on this?
Jim,
All
I
right.
have a
Yes,
question about.
please, go ahead.
So I find that one of the things that comes in the way that there is a deep-seated idea of what is better. So, for example, in the workplace, one would imagine, one can see that certain things can be done better, like be more inclusive, for instance, or be more flexible when it comes to rules. Like one of the things that I find difficult is that we have some very rigid rules and we apply them to the detriment of people. So, we hold these rules and regulations higher than the people that they're meant to serve in some
Yeah.
sense. So, one of the things I struggle with is this sense that something is better. This does not leave me. Like, I don't feel equanimous about things. Like, I don't feel that this is as good as that. I feel that this is definitely, it should be this way. It would be better for it to be this way.
Yes. And I can only share with you how I have practiced with that. I have had to use almost like a mantra. Jim, do not confuse your opinion with the truth. That's just my opinion. I think it will be better if it's this way, but that's my opinion. I do not know the truth. So that's the first step. Question the absolute veracity of your own viewpoint.
So
Now,
may I give a concrete example about
sure.
this? So because when we say about questioning, I agree, but I think that my mind rebels against this idea in few cases. So for instance, we have the housekeeping staff who clean the building, and I have seen that they sit in this really dingy little place. I mean, almost with where the trash cans are and everything. They sit on the floor and they eat their lunch. There's no proper light there even. So one of the things that I thought we should do is, create a little space with some tables and chairs for them to eat their lunch with kind of more hygiene, more dignity, right? So this is the type of thing where my mind does not really feel open to the idea that either way is fine. I feel that it's definitely better to give them more dignity and give them a better space. But
And
then when there's opposition to this, or people don't support it or something like that, then I have trouble reconciling with that.
how about you giving up your office and letting them eat and have their room in your office?
Actually, I have even suggested the same thing to them, but they are too shy to do it.
Yes. Well, why don't you just act on it and say, this is now the break room for the staff, and then you either work from home or do something like that. Take an action and see what happens.
So it's very rigid here, Jim. I'm sorry to go off too much in the specifics, but
No, it's good. But you
I mean,
pick your battles. You pick your battles. Sometimes, the Master Jesus was at the home of Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and they were all getting the idea that he was going to die soon, and Mary takes this jar of oil, this alabaster jar of oil, and breaks it and anoints his head with this oil and his feet. And Judas, who was the treasurer, gets all upset and says, why did you? We could have sold that and fed the poor. And Jesus had a very interesting answer. He said, basically, what Mary did was a personal act of great love, and the poor will be with us always. So we chip away at it to care for the poor and the underprivileged. But that's all, in a sense, we ever really do, Shweta. We can do our best. But I think it would be great to take an outrageous action. But you have to be fearless. They may can you. But in this country, if you're tenured, it's almost impossible to get fired. So I think you're safe, you know.
Yeah, no, they can't fire me, but
Yeah,
it can
I think it
become
would be
very
a great act of protest.
okay.
You know, but you'll find something. But what I'm saying is, why not be spontaneous? Why not be outrageous? But to
I have been
grumble,
gym. But then, people get very angry and the whole thing becomes very unpleasant. So then I back off. Then I start feeling
so
frustrated.
they're angry. Do you think that your position is a righteous one or not?
I do.
Well, let's go back to what Gandhiji did. You know, he was never passive. When people accuse him of passivity, he says, I'm not passive about anything. I have active nonviolence. And then I remember when he was going to go make salt, and when you watch the movie, someone says, oh, that's going to provoke the British. And he says, exactly, that's my point. But he would meet with the British and he would treat them with respect and love while he tweaked their noses over and over and over again. Always striving for justice, speaking truth to power, taking radical action. So that's the path of the Kshatriya. It's a very righteous path. That's Arjun's path. But you have to be fearless, Shweta, to do it.
Okay.
Pray about it. The other thing you could do is organize. That's one of the things that's happening in this country. We have had this marvelous resurgence of labor unions. The President of the United States, the first one, walked a picket line. And they got the big three auto workers to treat their employees with some justice. I don't know. You will know. I have absolute trust in your intuition. But you've got to be willing to be courageous, and you've got to be willing to not be run by fear. We can talk offline on this, but it's great stuff. It's great yoga. And thank you for having the compassion to think of people who are so downtrodden. And it's one of the great sins in the Indian economy that you see that there's such a disparity from the working class people and how much they earn and the way they're treated as opposed to the professional class.
Yes.
It's very hard. It's very, very hard. There's a lot of work to be done. But back in my old activist days, you think globally, but you act locally. You take some step towards righteousness. And Swamiji was an activist. always spoke truth to power. And I can remember in the Kulu Valley up near Siddhabari, some of the women who worked there would come and they would complain that their husbands were all, getting drunk in the tea stalls, and that they were, doing all the work at home, and everybody was so poor, and what were they going to do? What did he do? He helped start microeconomies, a whole textile industry in the Kulu Valley, where these women were making a decent living, fully to their good-for-nothing husbands. He helped them step forward themselves. But that's not complaining, that's action. Is that useful?
Yes, Jim. And I'll take up your offer to discuss this more offline.
All right. Okay, next verse. What number are we on? Because we have 34.
We're on 31 now.
Pardon me?
We're on 31.
Acha, okay.
Mahe partha vyapashritya yepi syuha papyonyaha striyo vaishyasthatha shudra stepi yanti param gatim. For taking refuge in me, they also, O Partha, who might be of inferior birth, women, Vaisyas, and Shudras, even they attain to the supreme goal. And there's a little note here that says of inferior birth, because by birth the Vaisyas are engaged only in agriculture, etc., and women and Shudras are debarred from the study of the Vedas.
Yes. So there are some teachers who try to, how can I say this? Ignore the fact that all religious scriptures are written in a cultural and temporal context. Gita is written in the cultural and temporal context of the caste system. So in that time period, they valued Brahmins and Kshatriyas as more worthy and noble, that they could study the scriptures, and Vaishyas, merchants, Shudras, laborers, and Chandalas, outcasts, well, they were not worthy. The truth is, we are not born into a varna. In an earlier chapter said, I am the author, Krishna says, I am the author of the fourfold caste according to guna and karma, meaning the qualities of mind and our actions. He does not say janma. He does not say birth. It later was corrupted into being about birth, being born into a caste. But the point here is, no matter what the conditions of our family of origin, we can advance spiritually. In some cultures, there's more social mobility than others. But it's not that one particular caste or being a woman is somehow inferior. That's just, it's not true. The import of the verse is if you come from an underprivileged or marginal family or circumstances, you still, if you practice yoga, can advance spiritually and improve your life. And the opposite is also true. You can be born into a family of great privilege. And if you may have the sacred thread, if you spend all your time grubbing for money, nothing but a merchant. So I'm not going to try to justify the historical, cultural perspective when the Gita was written. We don't need to. Doesn't mean it still doesn't have much truth in it. The deeper point is no one is left out of the ability to grow spiritually. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
किं पुनः ब्राह्मणः पुण्या भक्ता राजर्षयस्तथा अनित्यमं सुखं लोकमिमं प्राप्य भजस्व माम्. What need to mention holy Brahmanas and devoted Rajarshis, having obtained this transient joyless world, worship thou me.
So he says, for those people who are not living marginally, who may be educated, because in fact, it takes some time to be able to think about these deep spiritual, philosophical questions. There's the old slogan that to a starving person, God is bread. Nobody thinks about money more than the poor people. So if we're graced enough to have a life where we have the leisure time and the exposure to devote to scripture study, to prayer and meditation, to satsang, we're pretty lucky. And even more so if we, perhaps in the early part of our life, have gone after the cash and prizes and seen, that really doesn't do it. There must be more. And we get mumukshutva, the desire for liberation. Is there one more or two, Shveta?
Just one more.
Okay, we'll finish that one and then we'll finish for the evening.
Manmana bhav mada bhakto madaji mam namaskuru mame veshyasi yukte vai vamatmanam matparanayah. Fill thy mind with me, be my devotee, sacrifice unto me, bow down to me. Thus, having made thy heart steadfast in me, taking me as the supreme goal, thou shalt come to me.
Yes. So, very straightforward. What Brother Lawrence called the practice of the presence of God. Every dimension of our lives. Can I turn my mind to the infinite? Can I treat all the people in my life as incarnations of God. So I think there's a little Upanishad at the end.
Yes. Iti Rajvidya Rajguhyogo Nama Navamodhyayah. The end of the 9th chapter designated the way of the kingly knowledge and kingly secret.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Om. Thank you all.